That's right. And that goes back to what I evoked briefly earlier, is the specific regime of settler colonialism, violence, or even genocide, which is this notion coined by Friedrich Ratzel, the German, I think it was an anthropologist or geographer, I don't remember, precisely at the moment where the genocide against the Nama and the Ovairero were happening. This notion of Lebensraum, that there is a people that needs a place, that needs more space and that doesn't have the space that it needs. And it finds a space and it occupies the space. And the people who are on that space already cannot be considered as people worthy of that place and therefore can be expelled. So that's the basis of this regime of violence, right? And so, which is predicated on the ethnic cleansing, which is predicated not only on the ethnic cleansing of the people, but also on denying the fact that these people were there and were actually displaced. So in a way, it's a generalization of, what was the initial mantra of the Zionist project, which was a land without people for a people without a land. So it's kind of ironic that this notion of Lebensraum would be found at the core of the Zionist project. But that goes to a last type of pattern that we need to explore after the pattern that you've seen of repetition and complementarity in the genocide since October 2023, the patterns that sort of connect what's happening in Gaza with Guatemala and Namibia, also the patterns of what is happening now, and you just touched on it, what is happening now in Gaza with the deployment of Israeli policy since the beginning. So was there a project of ethnic cleansing since the beginning? How is it deployed? And this is something that you've started to work on, writing a book on Gaza that is provisionally called Ungrounding, and where you sort of make this long history of Gaza and the process of the deployment of the Zionist project in Gaza, which I think explains or illustrates the regime of violence that we just described.
So firstly, I think that Friedrich Ratzel's main thinking laboratory is the American frontier. I mean, he is a disciple of Turner, and he's looking at the way in which American pioneering spirit, frontier mentality, is the definition of that settler colonial project as the expulsion of the indigenous people, their concentration in places, in order to open that kind of Lebensraum. We should say that Lebensraum, from that kind of from an observation of the American frontier, ends up in Nazi ideology in Eastern Europe, where Hitler's kind of Eastern push is exactly to give the German people the Lebensraum, which is effectively a calculation of enough nutrition, enough soil to feed a growing population, right? So the German people could not actually survive without having access to primarily the Chernozem, the very fertile soil and the agricultural areas of South Ukraine. So that is a conception that shows you that settler colonialism first, although it may say natives have not been there, indigenous people are not there, or they're not people, they are part of the natural environment, firstly tracks the geography, the indigenous geography, to know what are the best places. And the best places are the places most robustly inhabited. And these are the places that actually in settler colonialism need to give ground for the master race to displace the inferior people, or to, if they would not displace, to murder them. So the Lebensraum need to be dependent on another space, the extermination place. So you have a calculation of life, or life entering into calculus, in terms of productivity of land, in terms of economical viability, right? Those that are biologically supporting a certain, the kind of the proliferation of numbers of a population of a particular race. At the same time, that you need to slowly calculate the destruction, slowly or fast, but initially settler colonialism worked with the kind of slowly constraining the possibilities of the life of the indigenous people to be. And this is what the reservations are. They displace people into the areas at the fringes of the productive zone without enough amenities or quality to enable life, where the density becomes higher, where people start dying out of epidemic and malnutrition. And that's the kind of slow death that is imposed through this idea. And that starts asking you questions about whether the term genocide even is suitable to describe those things. Because in the imaginary, in the kind of Shoah Holocaust imaginary of genocide, we're talking about a time-intense, direct killing. At least in the imagination, no? You take people, you transfer them into death camps, and you murder them in there. A time-intense decision and action, rather than protracted, sometimes century-long process by which indigenous people are calculated out of an environment in a particular way. And it's exactly that space-time that is open through that category of conditions of life. There's the potential there to open that up. And when you speak and try to understand the long history of Israeli settler colonialism and understand what has happened in the southern Palestine area, southern Palestine has been the last to experience the expulsion during the Nakba. So we're talking about after the last ceasefire, the majority.
So you mean the Gaza envelope?
The southwestern coast of Palestine, they inhabited. There was much further south, but it's not a densely inhabited area. But that area is very densely inhabited with farmers and with tribal societies along the arteries of the seasonal streams. And it is left for the last battles of the 1948 war. So starting October, Israel conquers and occupies Bir el-Saba, Beersheba today, which is sitting at one of the roots of Wadi Gaza. And
what is Wadi Gaza?
Wadi Gaza is the biggest water basin in southern Palestine, or in fact in Palestine at all. It's a huge basin that starts in the Hebron mountain of the West Bank, in which a lot of water and clay soil, very fertile agricultural soil, is draining from the mountain to the sea, and makes all that basin one of the most fertile parts of Palestine. So when Zionists goes, they see, not only Zionists, the proto-Zionists, the kind of the Orientalist travelers to the Holy Land, no? Most of them start in Alexandria and moves along the Via Maris, the coastal route, and walking through the desert, and all the description are the same, the monotone. After arriving in Wadi Gaza, which drains into the Mediterranean just south of Gaza City, all of a sudden are saying, like they have like all a biblical revelation, no? The kind of monotone of the desert turn into the robust colors and open fields of Palestine. And it's almost kind of like a biblical transition between desolation and life that happens in Wadi Gaza. And all along the tributaries, you have the tribal farming communities of the Tarabin, of the Azazmen, the Jabarat, all those clans and tribes that, in the area is called Bedouin Palestinians. And the Zionists noticed that. They noticed the quality of the soil. They noticed that this area is extremely robust. In fact, that area exports the majority of barley for the British beer industry. So well before the British occupation of Palestine, the British are, completely hungry for barley because during the Industrial Revolution, this is the pub is emerging as an institution, and Liverpool beer industry is actually powered by Wadi Gaza barley that is exported over there. So that area, again, they come into an area, they see its robustness that tells them that there is something there. Then came the ethnic cleansing of 1948. People were actually expelled down the tributaries into the Gaza Strip. So roughly, maybe slightly less, but roughly half of Palestinian refugees that ended up in Gaza at the end of 1948 are coming from tribal background, Palestinian Bedouins. And this is a significant fact because they bring indigenous techniques now into Gaza, but they are farmers without land, and they're all crowded in the camps, and then starts that so Zionist agronomists, most famous around them, Yosef Weitz, are starting to kind of like calculate the amount of water, of land, of amount of calories, and effectively building the settler colonial project around Gaza as what Ben-Gurion called the living wall. So around Gaza, initially, there is no, so after 48, when I say initially, there is no fence. There's a notion of where the ceasefire line is, and anyway, the Israelis keep on pushing it further and further to the west. And what protects the frontier are agrarian outposts, which are kind of military agrarian outposts that are built along the tributaries of Wadi Gaza, because effectively up the tributaries is where Palestinians return. Remember that the Palestinian return, well before it's the right of return, is a spontaneous act of farmers that were expelled into Gaza. They try to return home. So they move up the tributaries, they came down. Remember, third turning to the left, they kind of move up into where they were. And also the Wadi itself allows them to move less detected into that. So all those settlements are kind of on and along the Wadi Gaza tributaries with an instruction of shoot to kill any Palestinian, armed or unarmed, trying to return home. And then very fast they realize that what people return to is any remnants of what they have, and then they cross-plow the roads, they cross-plow the fields, so even the shapes of the fields are gone. They cross-plow, obviously, the buildings, etc., that were there, although there's a combination of tents and buildings in this particular part of Palestine. And then enters it's initially not part of the Green Revolution, but a kind of a proto-Green Revolution is a kind of a scientific experiment to create conditions of life different than what they were there, to amplify productivity, amplify the amount of gluten in the wheat that is, and barley that is produced, and in the calories from legume that is being cultivated there, and the entire mechanism. And then the Green Revolution began, and particularly Israel is leading in the Green Revolution, and where the site of it is the site that Israel called the Gaza envelope, which is the area around Gaza. So what happened in 1948, well, there's never been a Gaza Strip before 1948. It's a consequence of the expulsion of Palestinian and the ability of the Egyptian to still control the road between Rafah and Gaza. And they are expelled there, and then two complementary geographical spaces and projects emerge on both sides of the ceasefire line, which, by the way, is marked with a plow, like Rome. No, it's just like they take a tractor and kind of plow a line, cutting directly through fields and orchards and villages, straight through it. And on both sides of that plow line, you have different type of calculation. On the envelope, a calculation that is designed to amplify life, conditions of life, and on the other side, to destroy them. To a condition of life, these are calculated to bring about the expulsion of Palestinians from this area, because what Israel has not been able to achieve in 1948, which is to occupy that last bit, this 1.3% of mandatory Palestine, where the Egyptians managed to defend his finger into that, was painful for the Israelis. They wanted to complete the Nakba and push them into Egypt. Egypt held, and that place was there. The way to do it was through the reduction of the possibility of living there, through damming Wadi Gaza, so water does not pass, and what passed were the chemical residue from the artificial fertilization, from the nitrate immediately after in the 50s, nitrate becomes very common as a form of synthetic fertilizer, and begins the Green Revolution, begin with the conversion of nitrate factories from explosive into fertilizers. But in Palestine, there was another secret weapon, the Dead Sea, and of course the phosphates and bromium over there. You short circuit the geology of Palestine. You take earth from the Dead Sea, pour it on the clay around Gaza, and boom, the amount of fertilization is incredible. I mean, that area produces more than half of the vegetational calorie intake of Israel around Gaza. And that was the area that was attacked. No, so it's not like there are settlements beyond the fence around Gaza. The settlements are the mechanism of siege. The envelope puts the strip under siege, but you need to think about the envelope and the strip as two conditions in which life is calculated in a very different way, for very different aim. But the calculation is the same. So the minute that you start with calculation, that you speak about Lebensraum, you need to speak about its opposite. When you speak about biopolitics, you speak about necropolitics. And this was exactly the yin-yang of the Gaza Strip in an envelope.